Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where quite simply, we're on a mission to help you live longer by preventing health complications before they start. Every year, there are millions of cases of brain hemorrhage, but there really doesn't have to be. And at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to ensuring that those that don't have to happen don't. In this podcast, you will learn more about brain hemorrhages, their causes, how to prevent them, and so much more. Expect honest, straightforward conversations that will give you the information you need to take back control of your own health and potentially prevent the preventable. Hello, and welcome to this very first episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. In this podcast, we're going to be diving into everything around blood pressure, managing our health, and being proactive in order to support our health better, to prevent potentially preventable brain hemorrhages from happening. Through each episode, we'll be diving into different topics that contribute to our blood pressure, whether that is stress or sleep, exercise, or our diet. We'll be learning from experts around why blood pressure is so important, and we'll be speaking to people who've experienced firsthand the reality of brain hemorrhages too. But in today's episode, we're going to really understand why we're doing this in the first place, where all of this started, the origins of the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, and where we're heading in the future. We are so lucky today to be joined by the incredible Miss Jen Grieves, who is an amazing podcast host herself, hosting the Type 1 on 1 Diabetes podcast, which is all about supporting those people who are struggling and living with Type 1 diabetes. We're so lucky to have her here to guide me through this podcast and to be quizzing me on everything that is the Natalie Kate Moss Trust. And also to dive into more about, as I said before, the future of the trust and this very important campaign. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Hi, Jen.
Hello,
I
Fiona.
feel a little bit, I don't know, I'm not nervous about this episode. We've done 2 podcast episodes together before, I think, and I know that you're a pro, so I know I'm in good hands. But obviously today, as I mentioned in the intro, you're going to be exploring more about my experience, why we set up the trust, and what's ahead for us, why we're doing this podcast, what the Prevent the Preventable mission is all about. So I guess, unlike the other episodes, I'm going to just hand the reins over to you.
Yes, we're turning the tables. But, well, first of all, thank you for trusting me with this important episode. I think understanding the motivations behind the mission and the work that you do is really, really important for everyone. And it's an incredibly powerful story. So I think it's an important one to begin with, the foundations of this work and your why you do what you do and why the charity exists. So this, of course, all starts with Natalie, your sister. So let's talk about your wonderful sister and tell us a bit about her and also your life as a family as growing up.
Yeah. So Natalie was actually 6 years older than me. So there's quite a big age gap, but we kind of, it sounds really odd, but we kind of used to joke that like we were actually twins and I just waited around in the womb for 6 years because we were so close. We were, we really were like best friends. And she was very supportive. She was like the classic older sister, would lend me her fake ID and all that sort of stuff and pick me up after nights out, and would steal each other's clothes. And, every day we'd pretty much be on the phone together when she was walking back from work or whatnot. And yeah, we were goofy with each other. We were weird. We would argue like cats and dogs and then make up in the next second. We were very much best friends. She was the person, like, truly the person that I would go to for anything. And I think sibling relationships are also different because your siblings are the only people that know certain things about you. And they're the only person that's kind of on the same wavelength about you, particularly about like family life or your parents and whatnot. And other people wouldn't want to say something that's maybe out of place, but your sister would, very happily, agree with you, and you'd kind of have those conversations. And, I think anybody that does have any siblings or particularly sisters can kind of understand that relationship. And so, yeah, we were very, very close. And I think as a family, we were also, we were very close. We had these like classic family holidays every year. We yeah, we were really quite a tight unit. And to be honest, in my childhood, apart from maybe when my grandmother passed away and I was 11, but that's very much a natural cycle of life. There's not anything that happened that was necessarily like truly traumatic. And I think when Natalie did pass away, and we'll come on to kind of what happened, um, it was really traumatic and it really shook up our whole family dynamic. It affected us personally. And then obviously, because we had our own personal experiences, it affected us as a collective as well. And I think, to be honest, I think because Natalie was the middle child, and whilst I say I was 6 years younger, her and my older brother Sebastian, there was less than a year between them. So they were very, very close. And I think as I say, it affected us all in completely different ways. And I think we struggled to kind of maybe communicate how it affected us on an individual level, support ourselves and support other people, at the same time. I think that's a really complicated situation to be in and dynamic as well. So, yeah, I think from going through or being brought up in a way that everything was pretty easy, to having your life kind of ripped out from under your feet in a split second, was, very, very traumatic. And it's probably something that took me years, if not still now to this day, that I'm still processing in many ways. We'll talk about grief in other episodes, and we'll dive into that. And I think one of the common things that people talk about with grief is that, it could have been that Natalie died yesterday to me. I can hear her voice. And I sometimes do quite often feel like, I want to, I want to talk to Natalie about that. And then it's this really split second feeling that I know that she's not there. And so, yeah, it was monumental, to say the least.
And I will come back to that, because I think you're so right in that health is something we really take for granted until we don't have it, but equally an experience of grief, and someone particularly so close to you and so young for you as well, is something that you, as you said, you cannot prepare for, but you don't want to know until you have to know. And why would you? And I think the work that you're doing, particularly in prevention, which we will come on to kind of save people from these experiences, as you said, traumatic, is really important. What was Natalie like? Do you mind
She
describing her?
was very loud. I'm quite loud. She was very loud. She really liked having fun. I wouldn't describe her necessarily as a party girl, but she liked going out and having fun and loved getting dressed up. And yeah, I would say she was very creative, very arty. Did like textiles design management at university, worked at Karen Millen. She just moved down to to London to work for Karen Millen at head office when she did pass away. And I was a lot more like maybe logical and into my education, so to speak. But maybe we balance each other out in that sense. She was extremely kind, and she was one of those people who was very, very thoughtful. And if there was, say, you know, you'd achieve something, no matter how small, there was always like a little card she'd send. Or when I started university, she'd send me cards, and she'd do little things for me and make sure she came up to visit. And very much acted, as I said before, very much acted in a way as that older sister, big sister role, and did it very, very well.
So that family unit that you described was forever changed in December 2012. So what happened that night that you received that phone call?
So it was actually my best friend's birthday that day, and I was at Newcastle at university. So I was 20, I was 21 at the end. So this was the 2nd of December when I got a phone call from my dad. I would be 21, 3 weeks later. And I literally was back in my house, and I got a phone call from my dad. I was getting ready to go out for my best friend's birthday. And he said, Natalie's had a bleed on her brain. She's in intensive care. And I'd had this strange feeling that day that something was wrong. My granddad was old. He was, not well. And I thought I'd said to my friend, I think think I just feel like something's wrong. I feel like my granddad's maybe not well. And I got this phone call from my dad, and he said that about my sister. And obviously, when somebody is 26 and when they're fine, they're fit and they're well and they're healthy. And as you said before, if you're not ill, why would you expect something to happen? Especially when you're that young, you fully believe in your immortality, and you believe in the immortality of pretty much most people around you. And I got this phone call from my dad, and he was kind of like, we're on the train down to London. And Natalie was obviously in London. Unfortunately, she was in London because she went to one of the best neurological hospitals in the country. And, she could have had a brain hemorrhage in Thailand or in Egypt or, wherever she'd been, on the other side of the world. She did a lot of traveling like I've done. And and basically he was like, don't come down. I'm not exactly sure of the situation. It was also like 6, 7 o'clock at night or whatever it was. I was up in Newcastle. I wouldn't have got down till later in that evening. So wait until the morning. My brother, who lives in Italy, was sort of flying back from the UK to Italy that night. I think he had 2 flights, one that was going to, I don't know, Zurich or something. Got a phone call in Zurich, gets straight back on a plane to come back to, we're all kind of everywhere. Anyway, so obviously I'm like mortified, go down to my housemate's room, ring one of my other friends who lives around the corner, and we just sat in my lounge and just watched a film. And, you're obviously kind of like in this weird state of like, I'm trying to just wait, but, I feel helpless. And I think then I couldn't sleep. So I woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, I'm just getting the train. Whatever the first train is, I'm just getting the train down right now. And sat on that train, which felt like the longest train in the world, had to like, get across London to get to her. And then you get there and there's this, I remember this grief and sadness and shock on particularly my mum's face, but also my dad's face, that I've never seen before. Because also, as I say, like we've brought up in this way that like nothing was wrong. And that's when I think I really knew that, it was like really disastrous. And obviously we spent then 5 days in intensive care with Nats. And we were kind of jumping around from hotel to hotel and friend's house and this, that, and the other. And obviously she was in the middle of town, so we kind of wanted to be as near as possible. So it was all very complicated logistically as well. And then we were going to stay at one of our friends' house at night. We got there and literally got a phone call from the hospital saying like, you need to get here like now. So it was like this car chase across London, just trying to get to the hospital. And got in there, and then subsequently she passed away that night. And then obviously, like anybody who loses someone, that next few days is just like, you're bombarded, probably in a good way, but bombarded by people and everyone's around. And I remember we went back to the friend's house we were meant to stay, and literally we were lying on a bed, and my dad came and lay on the bed with me and literally just like cradled me, and like he was sobbing. And my dad was like a 6'4" rugby player. I'd never seen him cry, maybe once when his mum died. But and then I woke up in the morning, and then there's like the house was full of friends and family, and you're just paralyzed. I couldn't like speak or think or eat or shower. A friend said to go and shower, and I just like broke down in the shower. And it was kind of like that then for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, because you're in just shock really more than anything. And then I guess from there it kind of unfolded in a way of kind of trying to I guess navigate back to normal life. And I said I was at university. I was halfway through my second year, and it was kind of like, okay, I just need to get on now. And I think, I've spoken about this before in different podcasts. You try and go back to normality, or you try and go back to being a normal 20-year-old, 21-year-old. As I said, 3 weeks after Natalie died, I was 21, and I hated that moment. I hated trying to celebrate my 21st birthday when she wasn't there. It just felt wrong and awful. And that led me to then, not wanting to celebrate myself in many ways. You kind of then develop these habits and these beliefs and these thoughts out of such trauma. But yeah, then there on after, I guess, as I said earlier, we kind of then just went on our own journeys of, okay, well, how do we navigate this? How do we go back to normal life? I think for a long time, I can only really speak from my personal experience, but for a long time, I didn't deal with it. I remember my mum once saying, do you want to have therapy or whatnot? And I was like, no, I'm not having therapy. As if like, that's for people that can't handle themselves. And yeah, so I kind of just tried to go back to normal life, tried to go back to university, really struggled with a lot of stuff in a sense of that people were, found important. And I was like, that's really not important. And it just felt so different from everyone else. Um, and I guess that led me on to this very early stages of thinking differently about like life and perspective and the world and what I want and purpose, I guess. And maybe I didn't really realize it at that point, but it was definitely bubbling, probably. And I left university, went to live in Madrid for a year, came back, kind of tried to go back on the normal route again of working at a major supermarket as a buyer. And that just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel like it gave me enough depth in my life. And then I subsequently went on to do other things, which is where you wonderfully came into my life, and went down a work that was more purposeful. But I do think that there was a lot that happened after that. But I do think the beginning of all of that started with Natalie dying and really everything being shook up, and it just gave me a new perspective on what really matters in life, I guess. A huge thank you to Hugh James Solicitors for sponsoring this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, having your life torn apart by a brain hemorrhage is one thing, but learning that it could have been prevented and it was due to a mistake in your medical treatment is truly devastating. And whilst nothing can change what has happened, Hugh James's clinical negligence team can support those who have suffered a brain injury or bereavement due to a mistake in their treatment. To find out more about how and if they can support you, head to our show notes now.
Wow. It's just so much in that, and it's such a lot. And I think knowing you and your drivers and your motivations, the way you operate, I don't know how much of that was pre this experience, but so much of it resonates with who you are as the person I know. And obviously there we can see the seeds of where the charity or the trust at the time was born. But you mentioned a lot like normal life. I'm wondering how you as a family, you said you could only speak from your personal experience, but in these experiences of grief, they're so differing. And in that way, something that's happened to you so impactfully as a family is actually potentially quite isolating within that, in that you're all experiencing it differently. And I think maybe culturally it's quite hard to have these conversations. And also when, you said you came back and all these friends were there, when the door stops knocking and the flowers go away and things like that stillness where Natalie is now not there. Can you remember any of that, and whether you and how you sort of navigated that new dynamic as a family, because you're a family that is now not complete, just for people listening who might have have some touch point with this kind of experience?
Yeah, 100%. And it's very true that, as I said before, you're overwhelmed with the amount of people who come and visit. And every single minute of every single day, there's somebody like almost like trying to find a slot, which is beautiful. And you run out of vases in the house because you haven't got, enough for all the flowers that have been sent. You haven't got enough surface space for all the cards. And that is so amazingly wonderful and kind and thoughtful of people. And I think the problem comes when it's 6 months down the line and people have kind of gone like, oh, that was really sad when that happened. As if like it's very much in the past and it's very much buried and everyone's moved on. But for you, it is so immensely raw. And I think, what are we now? In December, it'll be 13 years later. And I say this quite a lot. Like it could have been yesterday when Natalie died in many ways. In many ways, of course, I've come to terms with my grief and I'm very much at peace with it, and I'm very comfortable with it. And I don't reject it in any way, or I'm not anxious about it. But as I said, when you've had such a strong relationship, that time moves in funny ways with grief. And I think that is one of the hardest things, when you almost feel like you're forgotten, but you're so vulnerable and you need that help from people. And whether it is just a text every, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, checking in, or whether it is just a coffee here and there, and just remembering that those people are still in pain is so incredibly important. And I guess that's a message to people that, the friends and the family, but I guess to the people who are in that position and dealing with it and like, why is everyone moving on and I can't? I guess it's It's remembering that other people have their own lives too. And it's not that they've forgotten about you or don't care, but they also have their own stuff to deal with as well. And I guess it's having perspective on that, which is so incredibly important, but also taking the and having the courage to be proactive, to say, to put your hand up and just say, I need a little bit of support here and there. That is so hard to do. I am not the best at doing that, but it is so incredibly important to communicate your needs.
Yeah, and I think potentially a lot of people don't know what to say or don't know how to check in, or maybe are worried that
I'll say
checking
the
in
wrong
with
thing.
you 6 months down the line is going to annoy you for some reason. As we said, everyone deals with this in different ways. So yeah, it's something to sort of think about, because unfortunately we get to a certain point in life and grief will touch us in some way or another. But it's interesting how it's such a difficult thing to navigate. Like you say, it shape shifts and you're still experiencing it in a different way. But with that, you have been able to put those feelings and the way that this has shaped you and irrevocably changed you, of course, this horrific event in your life, you've been able to start something that is now in many ways preventing other people from potentially having to go through this in the way that you did. And that is just incredible. Like, you are without a doubt saving lives with the work that you're doing. So where on earth in all of that trauma, and you're still trying to figure out who you are, you and your brother, and your mum and your dad are grieving parents, where did the seeds of the Natalie Kate Moss Trust come about?
Yeah, so I think I will give all credit to my brother and my mum, and I can't take any, because I remember at that first stage, mum, and it might have been a couple of days after she died, and just saying, we're going to do something. There's some good's going to come out of this. And her having that real like fight in her to be like, something has to come out of this. And her and my brother were the ones that really set it up. And my dad, because I think, if I remember rightly, all of this is a bit of a blur. And I think many people that go through trauma can remember bits, but not everything. But they reached out to Manchester University, because Natty went to Manchester University to do her undergrad, and we're trying to understand, is there anything that we can do or support. Initially, we were looking at supporting people who'd had a brain injury to go through university and giving them almost like a grant, and we did do that for a few years. We also gave money to the research team, and having that conversation with Stuart Allen, who is the lead on the intracerebral hemorrhage team at Manchester University research team, who is an astonishing man and really been transformative in everything that's happening there, and obviously our involvement in it. But they reached out and said, is there anything we can support? They weren't really doing any research into brain hemorrhage at that point. They were mainly doing it on ischemic stroke, which the difference is, a brain hemorrhage, firstly, is a subtype of stroke, but I don't think many people appreciate that. But the difference is, a hemorrhagic stroke is when there's bleed in or on the brain. Ischemic stroke is when there's a lack of blood supply to the brain. That's the key difference. So they were focusing on the ischemic stroke. But actually, by talking to them, it allowed them to go, okay, well, maybe there's something we can do here, and actually formulate a research project. And from that, they did, and they leveraged funding from other areas. That research project grew. We continue to fund them year on year. They continue to be able to leverage more funding, et cetera, et cetera. So that was in 2012. Fast forward 12 years to now, and they have 25 researchers in the team. They developed treatments which have been rolled out into the NHS, which have proven to reduce mortality by 10% at 1 month. So huge advancements, massively exciting steps in terms of treatment and saving lives. Probably going back to your original question, how did they gather that strength? I think quite often when you are in those moments of true trauma, you find this like really innate strength that you didn't necessarily know you had. And I think they found that in those moments. I think we all go through different waves in our grief journey, and that could be initially, that could be long term, decades on. And I think at different points, people gather different strength at different times. For me, I think the shock and the trauma of it all, it's so young, at 20 years old. I was still a child then. I really was still a child. And I think that was a real schism in time for me. That was like, there was a before Natalie died and an after Natalie died. And I was then going through this not only trauma of her dying, but like losing my childhood, I guess, as well. And I think I struggled at that point to kind of, really gather what was going on and like put things together. And I'd never organized a funeral or, navigated anything like that. So to kind of have that extra level of strength of like, we're going to set up the trust wasn't there for me, but it was definitely there for my brother and my mum. My brother then subsequently, so we set it up in 2012, maybe the beginning of 2012, or they set it up. Yeah, that must be right. And he then ended up running 7 marathons in 7 days in September 2012, which was just mad. But he had this, he had this real drive, like, I've just lost my sister, basically, arguably my twin. As I said, there was less than a year apart. We're Irish twins. And I need to do something to remember her. And that kind of really kicked things off and was like, really, like, we're serious about what we want to do. We want to raise money. And it kind of then also encouraged other people. The whole community around us was in entire shock about what had happened, because Natalie was 26. She was fine. She was funny. She was beautiful. All the boys fancied her. Um, she was she was like popular, not in like a really cliche way, but, everyone did like her. And, it sent ripple effects through, the community, because people were like, well, how can this just happen to her? So people were rallying around. They wanted to raise money, and that really allowed us to kind of kick off the trust as well. So, they did an awful lot of work at the beginning, I think. And then we'll come on to it, but it was maybe later down the line that I really felt like I'm ready now to kind of step into this.
Yeah, there's just something so shocking about their age in particular. And I think when you hear stroke, you don't think of someone who's 26 with their career, taking shape, and this loss of innocence that you talk about for yourself as well, I think is just world shattering, as you well know. But I think it's incredible to hear that, to go from a university research center that wasn't working on brain hemorrhage, and then this is now a center of excellence, is sort of pioneering work and research due to the work of the charity. Really shows, the smaller charities, I've always sort of seen the way you work, and that you're so completely engrossed in everything from finding sponsorships to doing the social media to delivering the money to the charity itself, to the university itself, excuse me. And that's something I think that I guess bigger charities must operate so differently. And you've seen firsthand how the work you've done is affecting the University of Manchester. Can you speak to that a little bit, just in terms of how granular the work that you do is, and how tied you are to it as a smaller operation?
A huge thank you to Colony Coworking for supporting us with this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, and for providing us with this beautiful studio too. Now, at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we are a small team working remotely, but on a mission to make a big difference. But finding the balance between flexible working and working in inspiring spaces surrounded by inspiring people can be a hard balance to strike sometimes. Colony is an expanding network of co-working spaces in Manchester, a place for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, startups, and established businesses. A place where everyone comes together, where ideas pollinate and businesses flourish. And Colony is helping NKMT do just that by supporting us with this podcast, by helping us reach more people with this vital message, and ultimately helping us to prevent the preventable. To find out more about how Colony can help your business grow, head to the show notes now. Yeah, so it is very granular. It is very tight knit. I know a lot of the research team. I did the Yorkshire 3 Peaks with them back in April, I think it was. So as a charity, firstly, I guess, we are very small, and obviously we were being run just literally by, my family. Up until maybe a couple of years ago when we got one person involved, and now over this year we've kind of expanded our team quite a lot. We are involved then in everything. It's like having a small business. You're involved in everything, and that's hard. It's hard to kind of wear all the hats. But you do see then the work that's being put in across everything. And yeah, and in terms of Manchester University, yeah, we're very, very close. We work really tightly with them to be really clear on, like, what money do they need? What are we supporting? So currently we donate £100,000 every year. We have done that for the last 3 years. And that basically funds a research fellow. And that research fellow in particular is called Katie Murray. She actually has been with Manchester University over a number of years, then went away to Boston and got that more experience, let's say, and knowledge, and then has come back. So it's really exciting to see, how the research team does develop, and actually being able to work with them and really understand it at like not just we're supporting that institution and giving them money, but very much working in partnership. And that's where I mentioned Stuart before, who is the lead on this research team, and also the director of the Jeffrey Jefferson Brain Research Center, which was established, I think it was in COVID, so I think it's 2020, which is, as you say, a center of excellence for brain research. And that's where it's really exciting now that, we're taking it to a new level, and we're very much involved kind of in that. And we're seeing them expand, and, we are, a really, really small component of that. But I think it's from that initial conversation, as I said earlier, that we had in 2020, that was really a catalyst for all of this moving forward. And I think there's so much to be done. We obviously, our initial motivation to set up the trust was to remember Natalie. But actually, as you do more work in this area, and I'm learning all the time, but brain hemorrhages are so incredibly common, unfortunately, and they're so incredibly devastating. To give you some facts, there's 4.6 million cases of brain hemorrhage globally every year, and that's more than breast cancer and lung cancer combined. We hear about those. We don't necessarily hear about brain hemorrhage, and there's nothing wrong about hearing about lung cancer and breast cancer. We should be, but we're not hearing about brain hemorrhage. And it's like, why are we not? Because if we're not hearing about it, nothing's then being done. And so those statistics and those number of cases haven't changed in 40 years. And yet, if somebody has a brain hemorrhage, only 3 out of 5 people will survive at 1 month, let alone whether they make it to 6 or a year or 2. And even if they do, they're likely to be incredibly severely disabled. So it's devastating. And so this is where it is so incredibly exciting to see the advancements happening at the University of Manchester and with the Jeffrey Jefferson Brain Research Center, and with these treatments that have been developed, particularly by a consultant called Dr. Adrian Parry-Jones. And that's been rolled out into the NHS. And so I think when you fund research, sometimes it can feel a bit like, oh, is there something going to come out of this? Or is it just kind of like a nicety? But the fact that we're seeing results come out of it is so incredibly exciting. And so, yeah, we're going to continue to be working with them, until we find like cures. But there's so much we can do in terms of prevention. We all know that prevention is better than cures. So that's what, the work that we're doing has kind of maybe split, arguably, a little bit over the last 12 months, because, if we can prevent these from happening in the first place, and we will be doing that. And this is obviously what this podcast is about. And but the more we can raise awareness about, I guess, the devastating impact and the reality of brain hemorrhages, and people understand that, then hopefully they're going to want to prevent them too.
Yeah, of course. And I think just bringing those stats, like, they're so hard hitting, it really brings it home that, like, none of us are really immune from this in one way or another. And this sort of raising awareness, not only for the incidence itself, but especially for prevention, is so important. So we'll come on to sort of the focus and the work that you're doing around prevention. But first of all, can you kind of explain, just, I'm sat here learning so much as I speak to you, what we know about brain hemorrhages in terms of why they're caused, but also what the stats are around potential for prevention?
Yeah. So it's so funny, because when Natalie had her brain hemorrhage, I was like, you're going through in terms. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, and it is very confusing. I think the brain's a very confusing place. Quite simply, and again, I'm not the neurologist or the doctor or anything. So, I try and grapple with this information just as much as anyone. But there are many different causes. I think the main causes are when there's some sort of weakness or damage to blood vessels in the brain. So that could be when there's a tangle in the blood vessels in the brain. Could be when there's something called an aneurysm, which is when there's a bulge in a blood vessel. And if there is any damage to the walls of the blood vessel in any way, or there's a bulge or something, one of the leading causes is when we have high blood pressure or hypertension. Now, the reason that that is a cause is because if there's damage and there's pressure going into the brain, they're likely to force a bleed. So that is why, the work around managing blood pressure is so incredibly important, because you could have damage in the blood vessels of your brain. You could have an aneurysm. And if you can manage your blood pressure, doesn't mean that it might not burst, but you are, giving yourself a much better shot at ensuring that it doesn't bleed. Um, you might not have an aneurysm, etc. But sometimes people do just have a brain hemorrhage, and there's no reason for it necessarily. And it might not be due to high blood pressure. But as I said before, if we can manage our blood pressure, we're mitigating the significant risk of having a brain hemorrhage. And so that's why our work now is so incredibly important around making people more aware of the critical understanding of blood pressure in the first place, but also checking it and then managing it. Because you asked about the stats around prevention, but high blood pressure, the stats are that on average a third of a population has high blood pressure, and 50% of those people are undiagnosed. So if you think about a sixth of a population walking around with high blood pressure, unaware that they do because it shows no signs or symptoms, and then there is a huge risk of a bleed on the brain or another type of stroke or a heart attack or potential damage to other organs or damage to blood vessels in the brain that over time could cause weakness and could cause dementia, and et cetera, et cetera. There is another episode on blood pressure, which is coming after this one, which I think if anyone's interested in this needs to listen to that, because it explains more about, how the blood pressure does have a physiological effect on your body. But the very point is that high blood pressure is a contributing factor to so many problems in your body. And the reality is that it is a contributing factor to 10 million deaths every year. And so the hard thing is that, well, not the hard thing, but ultimately blood pressure can be managed. And so I guess it's not the hard thing, it's the great thing. The great thing is that we can do something about it. And that's what our work is focusing on now. Because if we can, obviously, if I say a third of the population has high blood pressure, but 50% of those people are being managed, then great. They're already being sorted. Our work is focusing on that 50% of people that have no idea that they have high blood pressure. And we want to support them to be better educated on why they should be checking it, the risks, etc. We want to be encouraging them to check and reminding them to keep checking as well, and encouraging them to manage it thereafter. It's one thing checking, but if you don't do anything about it. So we do an awful lot of work around that now as a charity, whether through mediums such as this podcast, going out onto the streets of Manchester or wherever and doing awareness days and just checking people's blood pressure and talking to them one-on-one. We go into companies and we do lunch and learns. We do that quite a lot, and it's really well received. It's a very easy 30-minute session, but it's information that people have maybe just never been given. They have their blood pressure checked when they go to the doctors or whatnot, but they don't really know what the numbers mean, what they should be checking, how, what the risks are, everything, anything around it. And they're kind of like, oh, is that good? Okay, good. But I don't know why it's good. And so I guess this comes back to encouraging people to take responsibility, self-responsibility, and being proactive about their own health. Because if we can do that on an individual basis, we talk about these numbers on like a mass scale, but these are all individual people and these are all individual lives. And if we can take back individual responsibility, naturally by default will affect all those numbers. And this is what we're here to do, is to kind of give people the information to arm them to support their own health and that of their family. And it's an awfully big project that we're embarking on. We're really at the embryonic stages of it, but it needs to be done. And I think it's not new. We're not the first people to talk about blood pressure. I think the difference is that I feel like we're looking at it from a different lens for two reasons. One, that we're talking to the entire population, rather than, I think quite often the narrative around blood pressure can kind of get slanted towards older people. And it's not the case that only older people can have high blood pressure, younger people can too. So the age group of 16 to 35 have the highest proportion of undiagnosed cases proportionally to the number of cases, because they're not getting
Wow.
checked. They're not
Yeah.
going to the GP for anything else.
Yeah.
It shows no
You don't
signs
know
and
what you don't
symptoms.
know.
Yeah, exactly. So why would you check it? And if you think it's an old person's problem, I'm never going to have high blood pressure. You can still have high blood pressure if you're fit and well and healthy and young, obviously, as I say. So checking is the only way to actually know. So it's spreading that message is one thing, and just doing it slightly differently. Talking about it on podcasts, having a whole podcast about it, getting into schools and talking about it, getting into company. Doing it in a way that's like more accessible to people as well. And we've got a multitude of ideas of the way that we're going to roll this out over time as we sort of grow as a charity as well.
Yeah, I think you're so right. When you hear those statistics, they are, of course, shocking, but it's hard to relate that to your individual life if it's not something that's in your forefront of your mind. But
Yeah.
hearing your story today and hearing how you and your family were so impacted by what happened to you, I think it really kind of connects those dots. So thank you so much for being so upfront about it, and for just talking about this, which isn't easy, I'm sure, no matter how many times you do it. And it strikes me with Prevent the Preventable, which is the campaign that you're driving forward now, that actually the test is quite simple. So it is about people being aware that they actually need to check their blood pressure.
Yeah.
Can you speak to me if I've got that right, or sort of
Yeah,
whether
absolutely.
you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the point is that, it takes 40 seconds to check your blood pressure. You might be encouraged then to take 2 or 3, but at the end of the day, the maximum amount of time is gonna be 5 minutes. We all have 5 minutes in our life. And it is very easy. You literally have to do nothing. You just put a cuff on your arm, and it does it for you. And, there's so much tech out there, you can probably connect your blood pressure monitor to your phone, and you can definitely log your readings on your iPhone. I know that for sure. So it's kind of all available to us. I think the challenge with point about why doing it, remembering to do it and having access to monitors. I think that's one of the key things, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I only do it at the GP, or I don't think I should be doing it myself. I'm not sure about doing it myself, etc. And that's not necessarily true. It's so easy for you to do it individually. And I think when you have a monitor at home, particularly, that's the best place you can check your blood pressure, because you're calm, and your blood pressure is not going to spike. I think it's important for people to remember when they're checking their blood pressure that your blood pressure does go up and down. It goes up and down for different reasons, stress and exercise and all these different things. And if you've just had a coffee, let's say, or you've just had alcohol, or if you're hungover, and it will be elevated. The problem is if it's elevated all the time, and that's what we don't want. If it comes down, then great. And so that's why the regularity of checking is so incredibly important. And therefore, if we're going to check it more regularly, having an easy access to a monitor is also really important as well. So that's what we're campaigning for, even more so too. So when we go in to talk to companies, quite often the company will go, or the MD or the CEO will go, oh, we'll get a monitor for the office. Because the good thing is that one monitor can serve hundreds of people. It's not that you can only have one between two or whatnot. But again, having it, maybe workplaces are quite a stressful environment. Maybe that's not a great place for you to be measuring a blood pressure. Maybe at home on a Sunday morning might be better. So, these monitors cost 50, 60 quid, and that's an investment in your future. And so, and you could buy one for your entire family. So anytime people come round, and, they can check it too. So I think the more we can advocate for more accessibility to monitors in the workplace, in the educational institutions, at home, etc., make people aware of the need to be checking and having that access, I think the better.
And if people are taking this message on board, checking their blood pressure, and they're maybe a bit worried about the results, or they don't know how to interpret the results, like you say, what can people do? Where can they go from there?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, because I think people do worry about these things. They'll hear us talking about it, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so nervous about checking my blood pressure because I don't want it to be high." And a lot of people will then not check their blood pressure for that very reason. But it's whether you check it or not, the results are still the same. You're better checking it and knowing it and then managing it. Um, and as I said earlier, your blood pressure can be managed. It's not actually something to be scared of. I know plenty of people who have high blood pressure, and it's been managed either through lifestyle, and some of the contributing things to high blood pressure are, or a lot of high blood pressure, people's high blood pressure are a result of their lifestyle, whether that's drinking too much alcohol, being too stressed, not even having enough sleep, eating a very processed diet with lots of salt, being overweight, smoking, etc. All the things we know that are not necessarily good for us. But I think it's important to draw the dots between that and the fact that it can cause hypertension, and then the dots between that and actually what hypertension can potentially cause. So it potentially could be managed by making tweaks in your lifestyle, but if not, it can be managed through medication. The most important thing is if you're worried, even in the slightest, about your blood pressure, there is no problem about going to your GP and talking to them about it. That is what they are there for. And it's so much better to manage it early rather than it to cause something hugely devastating that potentially could completely change your life in a really negative way. And as you said before, this is why we're doing this. The whole point of why we're doing this campaign, but the charity in the first place, is to stop this happening to more people and to more families. So, I really encourage people to be, proactive for themselves, because the people that are going to benefit are themselves. And so, yeah, it's ultimately comes down to awareness, education, and access. But if they are worried, as I say, go to the GP. But they can find out more information on our website. We have a page, a Preventing Brain Haemorrhages page, and on there is a lot of information about managing blood pressure. There's a chart on there, which is from the NHS, and it talks about, well, it shows where your blood pressure, what your reading is, and is that normal? Is that high blood pressure, etc. Typically, your blood pressure should be 120/80. That's in the ideal world. Again, Adam will talk about this more in our blood pressure episode. But in the UK, they say anything up to 140, which is the top number, is fine. America, they'll say up to 130. So, but if we're around 120/80, that's a really good place to be. As I say, you can find that information on our website, on our prevention page. But please, if you're ever worried or you're not sure, just go to see your GP.
Very amazing. And in terms of the charity, you have this Prevent the Preventable campaign. And so you're running forward with that. But what's next for the charity kind of in the weeks, months, years to come? Because I know you've achieved so much already, but I also know that you're just getting started. So
I think you also know me. What did you say before this episode? You said like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm really busy, but things will end this week." And you were like, "You say that every week."
yeah,
Next week will be quieter.
I just want to kind of put it out there. I've never seen someone work so hard as you do, and you used to run this charity alongside another business, and I'm so thrilled that you're kind of going all in on this, because it's such incredible work, and you're so inspiring in what you do. And I've seen how hard you work with this charity, and the reach goes far beyond you and your family. And I just am in awe of you. So tell me what's going on, Fiona.
I feel a bit emotional. So we are, obviously, the podcast is a huge thing because it allows us to reach more people. And hopefully that'll leverage this message even more. We're continuing to go into companies and do more lunch and learns. We're expanding our corporate partnerships as well. We are looking at developing programs to go out into schools so that we can educate kids from a younger age. And so we're looking at all these different touch points by where we can educate and also provide access to monitors as well. So obviously schools being one place, we firmly believe that certain businesses such as gyms should have blood pressure monitors, given that it's such a stressful environment on the body. So that's something that we're going to be looking into over the year to come. Expanding our team, looking at how we can deliver more fundraising, because obviously the more fundraising we can, or more funds we can generate, the more funds we can deliver to Manchester University and support their research further as well. So we want to expand our funding to them too. For me, as sort of the director of the business, the biggest thing at this point is around structure and sustainability of the charity. And we're really kind of leveling that up, I suppose. And we've just had a new fundraising manager come on board. We've got we've rolled out more of our team. We've got a marketing manager, socials manager, an ops manager. And that enables us to really sort of create, as I say, structure and I guess departments. And hopefully that's going to enable us to grow so we can do more events, we can get in front of more people, be sharing this message more. Because I guess the two biggest parts of it when we talk about prevention, that's about getting in front of people and talking to them and educating them on blood pressure. The treatment then side of it is like, how do we deliver more funds to the Manchester University to support their research? So there's two different streams there really. And it's about balancing those streams to, ultimately deliver our mission, which is saving lives from this horrendous condition. And this podcast, we say it on our webpage, it's not a podcast. Obviously it's a podcast, but it's not just a podcast. It's a mission, and it's a mission to get in front of more people. And so the more we can grow our team, the more capacity we have, more funds we have, we can do just that. And if, those 50% or that sixth of a population that we talk about who are undiagnosed and potentially walking around with a huge, the potential of something huge happening to them, if we can get in front of them, if we can, completely change that number and it not be a sixth of a population, but even, a tenth or, none of them, nobody should be undiagnosed in a way, then we've kind of achieved our mission. But that's going to be a long time. So we're very aware that this is not something that can change overnight. But we need to be continuously getting out in front of people and continuously growing. And the more we can do that and keep pushing forward year by year by year, we're not going to achieve this mission in my lifetime, but hopefully we're going to create a really good foundation for that to be, we can move forward from that after that.
So if you can sum up the mission for the charity in like one sentence, what would you say?
Saving more lives from brain hemorrhage by preventing and treating them. So, generating funds for the research at Manchester University to improve outcomes after somebody has a brain hemorrhage, but working on our prevention campaign to stop them happening in the first place.
Yeah. And with that, how can people support the work that Natalie Kate Moss Trust is doing?
So in terms of our prevention message, which I think is really key, simply by sharing this episode, if they can share this episode with more people, encourage more people to be aware of our work, the importance of blood pressure, that is a great place to start. If they're a company owner or work in a company and they feel that, me coming in and doing a talk around the importance of managing blood pressure, then please do get in touch. Again, we've got more information about that on our website, but feel free to get in touch with me directly. And obviously, we talk about the funds. We're a charity as well. And if we're going to support this research further, we need to develop those funds. So if anybody does want to support us in any way in terms of fundraising, whether that's doing a race or running their own event or whatever that may look like, we'd be more than happy to support you in any way as well.
And I know you've already mentioned the website, but where can people go to find more information about what you're doing, Prevent the Preventable campaign, and getting involved and just finding a bit more information about Natalie Kate Moss Trust?
So in our show notes, there'll be full details around how they can get in touch, whether through our website, which is www.nataliekatemoss.co.uk, or our Instagram links are there, or Facebook, or our LinkedIn as well.
Lovely. And if there's one thing, we sort of mentioned that health is something you take for granted until you're sick. So life is busy. We get a lot of messages about our health and things we should be doing. And, we don't want to comprehend negative outcomes a lot of the time. And why would we? But if there's one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation today, to go and do for themselves or to tell their friends about, apart from sharing this wonderful podcast, of course, what is that for themselves and for their health?
Ultimately, just to check their check their blood pressure. Ultimately, to check their blood pressure, because I think if we can obviously do that on an individual basis, as I said before, and we can tell one other person to do the same, we're really going to start creating ripple effects with this message as well. So check your blood pressure, and as we said before, if it is high, check it again, a day later or whatnot. And if you're worried about it, please visit your GP.
Incredible. And you've given me some closing questions here for your guests, and seeing as you are the guest of honor today, I'm going to chuck them at you. So what is one non-negotiable for you in your routine, habits, or life that is supporting your health?
I think exercise, as you probably well know that, Jen, and for you as well. Obviously it supports your health. We all know that. I think it supports my mental health as well. If I feel too stagnant, it allows me a bit of space. We all know the benefits of exercise. But I think also, energy creates energy. And sometimes when we're feeling a bit low, that, just by doing some exercise, particularly in the morning, it can just really set you up for the day as well. So it's definitely a non-negotiable for me.
If you could get more people to understand one thing, what would it be? You might have already said it, but it's worth repeating.
No, I think this piece around blood pressure, I think I I started to really understand this at the beginning of last year, and I was probably the same as so many people, in my whole life before that. I didn't really understand, the importance of checking blood pressure. Yeah, sure, I had it checked, but I just had it checked at the doctor, so I didn't never thought about it proactively myself. And I think this significant shift in my understanding has changed the way I look at it, and also made me aware of how important it is. And I hope that by doing this podcast and this whole campaign, it really changes the outlook for other people in terms of managing their blood pressure as well. And when I speak to Adam Greenstein, who is a trustee of our of the charity, and also, an expert in hypertension, he said to me, he said that it is a red flag to your health. If your blood pressure is high, then you want to look at the rest of your health. Maybe you're not particularly healthy. And so I think it's a really good way. It's almost like a barometer of your health in general as well. So yeah, I think if we can, as I said, we can change that, we can have more people understanding that, we're going to significantly change a lot of these numbers around, and a lot of these number of cases. And as I said before, not just brain hemorrhages, but countless other health complications.
Yeah, that's something I've really taken away from speaking to you, is how simple this test is, but how much it can indicate, not necessarily, and it doesn't need to be terrifying, but how much that blood pressure result or repeated blood pressure result, as you say, can indicate certain other things going on. And it's just then a tool for diagnostics, isn't it? Which I think is a helpful thing. Do you have a motto for life? And if so, what is it?
I probably have many, but one I'm going to use is, I use this a lot in my old work, but I think it's relevant now, which is live a life by design, not by default. And I think so often, so many of us float through life and are a passenger sometimes to what happens to us. And we're never taking responsibility for ourselves and our actions and, our future. And I think the Prevent the Preventable podcast is all about giving people the information, the education that they need in order to take back responsibility of their own health and therefore their own life as well. And I guess, therefore, what I mean by like living a life by design and not by default, it's like not necessarily allowing the circumstances around you just to create a life by default. It is by being being in the driver's seat, I guess, and then designing the life that you want to live. Not everything happens in that way where everything is perfect and everything pans out the way you want it to. But when you're proactive, when you take responsibility, you can create more of your life than you probably think you could have done before. And that includes how your health pans out, not just today, but in the future, because a lot of our decisions that we make now are what informs our health down the line as well.
Yeah. And, not just even yourself, but you see that through the work that you're doing, how that is then moving into other people's lives and positively impacting people that you've never even met. So thank you so much, Fiona, for this amazing episode. I truly think we need more Fionas in this world, and the legacy you are creating in Natalie's name really is incredible. And I think you're an absolute inspiration. And thank you so much for putting your life's work into this work that is affecting so many people's lives. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Jen. Well, I'll be sharing more information about the work that you do because it's equally as inspiring in the intros and the outros as well. So people can find out more about where to find you too. So thank you so much for being here to support me through this podcast and guiding me so gently through it as well. And yeah, I'm very grateful to have you around to do that. So thank you very much. It is quite bizarre sometimes to have somebody else quiz you about your work and to dive into the detail about why we started in the first place. And in some way, it's quite therapeutic to really rewind to why we're doing this, to remember Natalie, to think about how far we have come as a charity, because we have come really far, but there is still so much more work to do. Through this podcast, we hope that we can provide more education and more awareness to this critical importance of this campaign, this mission to prevent the preventable. And as I said to Jen, if you can do one thing today to support this campaign, share this episode with somebody you know that it would help, somebody that would be interested, somebody that needs to hear what we are talking about. Because through doing that, hopefully we can create a ripple effect and really start to change some of these numbers on a major level as well. So to find out more about all of that we're talking about, this campaign that'll prevent the preventable mission, keep listening to the episodes that are coming up. As I said earlier, there are going to be episodes around sleep and stress, real life stories, and we're going to be diving in to what is blood pressure as well with the experts. Thank you so much again to Jen, who hosted today's episode. And you can find out more about her work, which is the podcast Type 1 on 1, which is supporting people with type 1 diabetes, by heading to the show notes. She is a real expert in this area and a real trailblazer in supporting people who are struggling to navigate life with this really critical condition. So thank you again to her. Thank you for listening. And until next time, help us prevent the preventable.